Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a really big one. We've got this stack of essential academic readings all about citizenship and democracy.
Yeah, I mean, these are foundational concepts, right? We've got the key scholars here, Marshall, Bobeck, Shaw, Goodman, Vink. And our goal isn't just to list them, it's to really unpack the core debates, the kind of intellectual scaffolding of the field right now.
Exactly. And if you look closely at these sources, they really cluster around three main pillars. That's what we want to guide you through. First, there's the foundational theory and, how do we even define membership? Second, we'll get into the contemporary challenges, the really pressing issues today. And finally, the practical side, how scholars actually compare different policies, different regimes in the real world. So by the end, you should have a pretty clear map of the field.
Okay, let's start right there with the foundations. When scholars first try to define citizenship, what's the stickiest point, the main tension? Well, it really comes down to the boundary problem. Simple as that. Who belongs? Who's in the political community and who's out? Rainer Baubeck really drills down on this. His work focuses on political membership and democratic boundaries. And the core tension he highlights is that any definition of us automatically creates a them. It's an act of exclusion.
Right. And the people drawing that line, they're already inside the circle they're creating.
Precisely. That's Baubeck's point. The very process of deciding who gets citizenship, who gets to vote, it's decided by people who already have it. The excluded don't get a democratic say in the rules that exclude them. It forces us to see the sort of inherently non-democratic kernel within the definition of democratic membership itself. It's quite the paradox.
Okay, so step one is drawing the boundary. But then what about inside that boundary? What does being a citizen actually mean? The reading suggests there's a big philosophical split here.
Yeah, there really is. And that's where someone like Isolde Honohan comes in. She contrasts the liberal and Republican conceptions of citizenship. And look, this isn't just academic hair splitting. These views lead to very different ideas about what's expected of you as a citizen. The liberal view, it's mostly about rights as protections, freedom of speech, right to property, things that shield the individual from the state. The emphasis is on non-interference.
Okay, like a set of guarantees.
Yeah.
And the Republican view.
That's much more demanding. The Republican tradition emphasizes active participation, civic virtue, being dedicated to the common good. It's not enough just to have rights passively. You're kind of expected to roll up your sleeves and engage in self-government. Think having a library card versus actually volunteering at the library. Different level of involvement.
That's a really clear distinction. But, to understand why this matters so much today, things like debates over welfare, social safety nets, we absolutely have to talk about the historical anchor. We can't skip T.H. Marshall.
Oh, absolutely not. Marshall's Citizenship and Social Class, I mean, it's from 1950, but it's basically the foundational text for so much of this. He gave us the framework for seeing citizenship not as just a static legal thing, but as this evolving process, a struggle for equal status across different spheres of life.
And how did he break that evolution down? What were the stages?
Well, he saw it unfolding over centuries, mainly in three parts or types of rights that kind of layered on top of each other. First, civil rights. These largely solidified in the 18th century. Think freedom of speech, right to justice, liberty of the person, core individual freedoms.
Okay, the baby.
The political rights. That was more the 19th century struggle. Primarily the right to participate in power, so voting, holding office. The big fight there was expanding suffrage beyond, property owner.
Making it more universal. And the final piece, the one that really shifted things.
That's social rights, which he saw coming into their own in the 20th century. This was the radical bit. It's the idea that true citizenship requires more than just legal status. It needs a minimum level of economic security and welfare, access to education, healthcare, a share in the society's heritage. Marshall's genius was linking socioeconomic status directly to citizenship. He argued that without these social rights, the civil and political rights of the poor are, well, functionally pretty hollow.
Okay, so that gives us a really strong theoretical base, defining boundaries with Baubeck, the nature of belonging with Honohan, and that crucial historical link to class and social rights from Marshall. So let's jump forward. We have these definitions, these ideals. What are the really urgent contemporary pressures challenging that picture right now?
Right. If Marshall laid out the sort of 20th century benchmark, A lot of the current scholarship is about the stresses on that model in the 21st. And the sources we looked at really highlight two mazy zones of pressure running in parallel. There's external pressure on democratic institutions, often from within, and then there's internal pressure focusing on the individual citizen's behavior.
Let's take the institutional one first. The readings mention populism quite a bit. Jay Shaw's work on the populist challenge to constitutional citizenship.
Exactly. Shaw analyzes how certain populist movements aren't just disagreeing on policy, they're challenging the underlying rules of the game, the constitutional framework itself. Often it involves claiming to represent the true people and framing opponents not just as wrong, but as illegitimate, maybe even enemies of the state.
And Shaw uses this phrase, the closing of discursive space. Can you unpack that a bit? What does that mean practically?
Sure, it means that healthy constitutional democracy depends on having an arena where basically anything can be debated legitimately. When that space closes, certain topics, institutions, maybe the courts, the media, minority rights get declared off limits. Or they're actively attacked as illegitimate by political actors. The argument shifts from what we should do to whether your opponent even has the right to be part of the discussion. That puts immense strain on the democratic process.
Okay, that's a serious institutional threat. But you said there's a parallel focus, turning inward to the citizen. S.W. Goodman's work on good citizens in democratic hard times. That sounds heavy, placing the burden of democratic survival on how individuals behave.
It is heavy, and it brings up a real dilemma. If you take the purely liberal view citizenship is just rights, then maybe you can be a passive citizen and democracy should still work. But if democracy genuinely feels like it's under stress from populism, polarization, misinformation, whatever, then the field is asking, do citizens need to step up? Do they need to adopt a more active, virtuous, maybe more Republican role just to keep the system stable?
But isn't there a danger there? Debating how citizens should behave. Sounds like it could easily slip into prescribing conformity, telling people how to think or act. Are scholars wrestling with that?
Oh, absolutely. That tension is clear in the readings. There's a real awareness that demanding certain behaviors risks becoming moralistic or worse, shutting down legitimate dissent. But they're trying to navigate this carefully. They're asking, what's the minimum level of, say, civic engagement or respect for basic facts, what one text calls civility norms, that's needed for a diverse society to function politically? It's a real tightrope. How do you encourage responsible citizenship without undermining individual freedom? The debate's moved way beyond just voting rights now.
Right. It's about the underlying norms and behaviors needed for democracy to actually work under pressure. Okay, that brings us nicely to the third pillar you mentioned. We've gone from theory and challenges to, well, how do scholars actually measure and compare this stuff in the real world? How do they apply it?
Yeah, this is where citizenship studies really becomes an empirical social science. It's about systematic comparison. And a key figure here is Martin Vink with his work on comparing citizenship regimes. Vink basically provides the tools, the methodology to take all these incredibly varied national rules on how you get naturalized, whether you can hold dual citizenship, voting rights for residents who aren't citizens, all that complexity. And he helps categorize it, put it into frameworks so we can actually make meaningful comparisons across countries. If you want to know objectively if country X is more inclusive or exclusive in its citizenship policies than country Y, you need a framework like Vink's. It cuts through the legal jargon.
So it's about building the empirical toolkit for comparison. And the reading suggests this policy focus is getting even broader now. It's not just about the laws themselves anymore.
That's exactly the trend highlighted in that 2023 review by S.W. Goodman on policy causes and consequences. The research has shifted significantly. Academics aren't just describing the rules now. They're asking, what drives these policies? Why does one country have birthright citizenship and another doesn't? Those are the causes, looking at politics, history, economics, and then crucially, what are the effects of these policies? Those are the consequences. How do different citizenship rules impact things like immigrant integration, political loyalty, social cohesion, economic outcomes?
Got it. So the field is now looking at the whole cycle, from the political forces that shape the laws to the laws themselves, and then tracking the real-world impact of those laws. It sounds incredibly comprehensive.
It really is. It's moved from Marshall's historical look at class and rights, through defining membership and tackling threats, all the way to using pretty sophisticated methods to analyze the entire policy process and its outcomes.
Okay, this deep dive has really clarified the landscape. It feels like we've mapped out those three core areas you mentioned. The foundational theory defining who belongs and what rights they have. Then the big contemporary challenges like the populist threat to institutions and this really tricky debate about what makes a good citizen when times get tough. And finally, the applied empirical work rigorously comparing policy regimes and analyzing their causes and effects across different countries.
Right. And maybe it's a final thought to leave you with, something that kind of connects all these pieces. Consider this. If the foundational theories, like Baubeck's work on boundaries, define our ideals of membership, and if contemporary challenges, like populism, are pushing against those boundaries really hard right now, what happens when the practical realities, the measured consequences of actual policies, the stuff Vink and Goodman analyze, become so persistent, so undeniable, that they actually force us to change the theory itself? Does the messy reality of policy implementation eventually reshape our ideals about who belongs? Does practice end up dictating theory? It's a pretty fundamental question about how societies evolve.
A really powerful question to think about. Does reality shape our ideals or the other way around?
Yeah.
Lots to mull over there. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into citizenship and democracy. We'll talk to you next time.